Hello and welcome to the first of the new series of redoing the van electrics, where I'm going to be swapping out the old AGM battery for a whopping great lithium battery, putting a much bigger inverter in so as to drive the induction hob and a small electric kettle, changing the consumer unit for a double pole one instead of single pole, and replacing the old charger that didn't work with a new one that hopefully should. And I'm going to be seeking your suggestions, please, on how to lay it out, because I'm umming and ahhing about this a bit. The inverter is much bigger than the old one, the battery is much bigger than the old one, so I need to rearrange how things are in the van, but I want to do that without losing too much storage space for where I currently store clothes and things, and I'm just not quite sure how best to put things, so I will seek your suggestions, helpful suggestions hopefully. However, before we get to that, just a quick update on the latest status of the plumbing, because it's all fixed and I just need to show you. First of all, you can see the sink and countertop are in, which we already knew, but I have actually bolted them down now, and also put back the overhead cupboards. So that's a great weight off my mind. It means I can actually go away now in the van, albeit still with no cooking. The induction cooktop is going to sit there, and I've decided I'm going to leave it portable rather than set in place, and then if I just want that as countertop I can, and then I'll just put the induction cooktop there when I want it, and it will go there, and the mains plug won't go into the sink but will go over to one of the main sockets. I was considering having a socket on the wall, but in fact the lead that is supplied with this thing is so long it might as well just plug into the existing sockets down there whenever I need it. I don't think that'll be a nuisance, and if it is, I'll put the extension cable in. Oh, and just before we get to the plumbing, but on a related note, there's the toilet. You will see I have now, at long last, put the toilet roll holder in. Yay! So I can be sitting on the loo and reach down, and there's the bog roll. Hooray! Now, where was I? Ah, yes, the plumbing. When I left you last, I had a drip coming out of the pipe where the bit of pipe from the bottom of the tap squidges into the pipe coming up from the storage tank. It's a barbed connection that normally pushes in and should seal on its own. I had so many people saying, oh, you need a Jubilee clip on that, but no, you really don't. You shouldn't. The barbs are supposed to be a seal when you push it into the end of the other pipe. That should be sufficient. And even if you put a Jubilee clip on it, because of the shape of the barbs, they're not flat for the Jubilee clip to squidge around, so it's really not designed for that at all. And they should work. In this case it didn't. I put sealant gunge around it, and that cured the drip. Absolutely fine. Turn the tap on, no drips at all. Huge sigh of relief. Until I noticed another drip coming from the body of the tap itself. And that turns out to be not quite one single plastic thing, but it was bits of plastic that were all glued together, and it was not something you could take apart to seal whatever was causing that. There was a vertical crack in the body of the plastic tap. So I gave up and I bought another tap, which meant, of course, taking apart the thing I just gunged in with the gunge to stop the leak further down. However, 'tis done. I'll show you. It would take a very astute eye indeed to realise that that is a different tap, because it looks pretty much the same, but it's a different one of the same style by a different manufacturer. And on the old tap it was this plastic body bit that had a vertical crack down it, all on the thread where you screw it up, so you couldn't put sealant on it because then the thread wouldn't work. But that's the new one, and this does not have a crack in it, so that's fine. And then it comes down here, over there, until it joins the black pipe coming out of the supply tank. And again, I have just pushed that in. It's a barb fitting and it does as it's supposed to. No need for Jubilee clips or gunge. That does not drip. So at last what I have is a supply tank here that goes up to the tap, and then the waste comes out and goes into that one. All is well on the plumbing front. So then, let us turn our attention to the electrics, which is the main focus of this video, and I will start by doing a quick recap of how it is currently set up. I have an electrics cupboard here as you enter the van, with the switches for the 12-volt appliances, a little battery voltage readout with a couple of USBs on it, and there are bits inside that cabinet which I will show you. Plus then under this seat we have a bit of storage space at the front that's just got an empty water canister and some spanners. The two main sockets are down the edge there. The bottom one is powered from the inverter, the top one comes from the incoming shore power connection, so they are separate. And then the current battery is at the back there. That battery is a 160 amp hour AGM. It's about 5 years old, but it seems to be doing sterling service. It works pretty well. Random bit of storage space down there, where as you can see I've got a roll of gaffer tape, a small funnel, and the little red thing right at the bottom is the key that is the master key for the electrics. And that turns this, which is the master supply. You are no doubt thinking that's a very awkward place for a master switch to be, and you're absolutely right, it was a terrible decision, but because all the wires come off the battery there, and the first thing I wanted them to do was go through a master switch, that's where they went. So that's the other side of that switch, so the positive comes on there from the battery, then there's the master switch, and then two lines feed off it, one of which goes down to the inverter through a fuse specifically for the inverter, and the other one comes off there, goes round another fuse down there, and then into the individual 12-volt fuses for the 12-volt circuits, which then go through their switches, which then go off to the various different appliances, and they disappear round to the van down there. There's a thing that goes under the floor there. Meanwhile, we have a bus bar for all the negatives, which again disappear off to their individual appliances. We don't use the vehicle chassis as a return path, it's two wires to each thing. And so in here we have this inverter, only 375 watts and therefore not big enough to run the impending induction hob. Got the solar charge controller, which is doing a fine job and will stay where it is, I'm almost certain. To the left of it here was the mains battery charger, but that was broken and so I've got a new one. And on the left here is the consumer unit, which has an RCD in it. Now I think in America that would be called something like a GFCI? It's a GF something. It detects any leaked current going to Earth and then switches it off. And then also two breakers, which are like big fuses. And this whole thing is single pole, and apparently the standard is double pole in case you go somewhere where the poles have been reversed in the shore supply. I realise this does all look very chaotic, but it is actually very logical if you follow the flow of where the wires are going. But things that are changing are, that's being swapped out for a bigger unit which will take up all that space, that's staying where it is, that's coming out with a bigger inverter, the battery is going to be replaced with a bigger battery. And this is the dilemma. Where exactly and how should I lay things out? And let me put some things in place to give you an idea of the scale we're talking about. First of all, and easiest of all, there's the new consumer unit, which as you can see is a double pole unit and is therefore wider than the existing one. I'll either put it there, I mean not there, but there, replacing the old one, or I could, if I don't put the charger there, I could put it there, sort of down next to where the solar thing is, because that inverter won't be there, so the mains charger could go there. Or I could put that there. The little door on the front of it can hinge either way, so even if it's there, it can hinge out so you can get to the switches. So I'm unsure about how to do that one. That gives you some idea of the scale of the new battery, which will almost fit into that compartment, but I don't actually think, I don't know, I'm not sure I can actually get it in there. There may have to be some gentle demolition of the wood below in order to get that battery in there. But even then, oh, I don't know. You see, what I'm but pondering is, there are your terminals. Wires are going to have to come off those terminals over to a new master switch, because I want a master switch that's more accessible. So it'll probably be over here somewhere, on the outside of here. If I can fit one in, maybe down the bottom, then I could instantly just reach in the van and turn the switch, instead of having to faff about under the seat. And then of course the wires need to go from there through a couple of fuses. There'll need to be a mega fuse going off to the inverter, because a 2000 watt inverter is about 200 amps at 12 volts. So that needs a black blooming great fuse. And then there'll be the existing fuse over to the 12 volt circuits. And the question then is where to put the new inverter. It cannot fit in there, it's far too big. Actually, I'll get the inverter out, you'll see. That is the inverter, which although slim, is quite chunky. Now this does actually go, or could go, hang on, if I move the water canister out the way. The inverter could, technically, go there. I'd probably have to put another bit of wood in to mount it to, but it can go there. But you end up with this problem, and the same is true of the battery. There are the terminals for the inverter. It's going to have very, very, very thick cables coming off that to carry all the current. So they're not going to bend round the corner very easily where this wood is. So I'm going to have to take that wood out, and the cables will end up coming through into this section. Now this is where I currently store the bedding. And it's the perfect size, as you can see. I've got a pillow, I've got blankets, the duvets fold up perfectly into that section. And it's just, I know this is silly, it's just going to annoy me if I have wiring sticking out into here and have to block this section off, because then suddenly this is the wrong size for all the bedding and I'll have to move the bedding elsewhere. And yet, if I have these here, I'll have to do that because, well, the wires coming off that can come that way to the switch, and from there through there, and from there onto that, but they need to get onto there somehow, and the connections on that I don't think are designed so that it can come upwards. Actually, let's have a look. No, you see, there's a naked connection, and with a terminal on it there, the wire is going to have to come off that way, not that way. It'd be much easier for me if it could go upwards, but it's going to have to come off backwards, which means that the length of this, plus the amount of length you'd need for the wire to be able to bend, is going to be bigger than I have available. Therefore, if the wires coming off this have to go back out a bit, because they'll be big and thick and not very bendy, and they're going to end up going into that compartment, should I perhaps put the inverter and battery in that compartment, which is slightly bigger than the one they're currently in which case where am I going to put the bedding? It might squish into that space, but then you have still got, I mean, there will still need to be wires running over the top of it to come through to the main electrical cupboard, because that has got to stay, because all the 12 volt stuff is in there for distribution round the van, so it goes down through the floor there. There's the incoming shore mains there, and the solar panel comes down this side and round the back. So this stays, and it's got all the switches on it as well. This is not moving. There will need to be a supply to that, and of course if the mains is coming in, there will be mains from that to the charger to the battery, also mains to that socket which would come into this. Oh, I don't know. How can I get that inverter in there? I wonder if it can go face down. No, I'm being ridiculous. It can't go face down, because firstly it is too tall. It is taller than that compartment. Secondly, of course, those sockets are at the bottom or top, depending which way I put it. The incoming mains goes in there. So even if it were that way up or that way up, oops, don't drop it. Ugh, and then you've got fans that need space for ventilation. So it cannot go up. It would have to go that way. Either way, I don't think that can go in there, so it has to go somewhere else. I was just wondering whether I could squeeze it against the wall there and still have room for the bedding, but I don't think I can. And you have to leave enough space, because there's fans here, so they need space for ventilation, and I still probably haven't got enough space for the wires to come out the end there. That is not going to work. Let us move round the van then to the next storage bin, and this is where I usually put a bag of clothes if I'm going away. You can see I've got a towel in there, a sleeping bag, and there's the new charger just sitting quite happily. This is a nice big space, but it's precisely because it's a nice big space I was hoping to keep it as storage, but I think we're going to end up with this being the only place that the inverter can go, even if the battery will fit in here. And I think the battery will just fit. If I take that switch off so it's not sticking out, The battery can't go quite up to the corner here because of that post, but if the battery starts here and comes up to here, it doesn't hit those sockets. Obviously all the woodwork and things will have to come out, but I think I can, get the battery in there with a bit of gentle persuasion. The trouble is I'm going to have to take all of this out to work out if I can drop the battery, and it'll have to go in at a slight angle because it's just too wide for these lips here, but if I can put it in at an angle it might just slot into place. That is my hoping, which will then leave an annoying little gap behind it because it'll be up against that. I suppose that's not too bad, and it will shrink the space available here, but then there'd still be space for that actually. Yes, there would, and as that lines up with those sockets, that would almost be the perfect size to hold that. Although whether you really want a water container next to a lithium battery is another question. It's never been a problem so far. I've had that with water in it and the AGM. And of course the terminals are at the top, so if any water actually leaked out of this, it's just going to soak the bottom of the van rather than get itself onto the battery magically somehow. The water's not going to leap up through magic anti-gravity properties and spread itself across the terminals. It would just leak everywhere. It'd probably do more damage to that cabinet. Anyway, the point is, I think the battery can go in there, and the inverter is probably going to have to go in there. And if you're thinking, well, how about that end cabinet? Of course not, because there is a toilet there, new toilet hole holder, and not enough space there for anything else. So that has to stay as it is. Which means, almost by just thinking aloud as I talk to you, I've kind of come to the conclusion, haven't I? I've made my own decision. Inverter here. Which is not too far away from the battery, so the cables to and from the inverter needn't be hugely long, which you do want to keep them as short as possible to reduce voltage drop. This, of course, lends itself to its own conundrum. Should it be there, flat against the back wall? Should it be here, flat against the front wall? In both cases there is sufficient space for ventilation. I mean, I'll put that in the middle, but there's space for ventilation, and those terminals could then go round. Oh, they're going to have to intrude into the cabinet there. No! And over to the battery compartment, which will be there-ish. Yay, 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 yay. It's going to be a mess. I don't like mess. I like things neat. I could alternatively put it flat like that, which still gives us space for ventilation, space for the batteries, and then put a little shelf over the top of it so that this is still a storage area. It just isn't quite as deep as it was before. I could even make that, if I put that up against there, it could be a little stepped thing. So this would be a slightly oddly shaped storage cupboard. I think that may end up being what happens. I don't know, flat with a shelf over the top of it, or vertical against the edge, maybe with a partition in front of it. What do you reckon? Bearing in mind that from that end is where you've got the two main sockets out. I'm going to connect one of them, one only, so that would have to loop out, come back, over here, round here, and then connect into the socket that's at the bottom there, because that bottom socket is going to remain the inverter socket. The top socket is going to remain incoming shore power. And you may be asking, well, why not connect both of those, one to each of the Renogy outputs? And the answer on that is just that I thought, well, supposing the inverter blows up, then even if you plug into shore mains, because the shore mains goes through the inverter, which has a transfer switch. So if the inverter blew up, you could plug into shore mains and you still wouldn't have anything on the sockets. Whereas if I directly connect one of the sockets to shore mains, then even if the inverter blows up, you've still got a connection if you plug in, if you see my logic. And quite aside from that mains connection at the other end, we have the battery terminals, which will need to come all the way around through there, no, over to the battery. So in fact, having it on that side is probably a bad idea. It needs to be here, so that if the cables do run round, well, they will have to, they can run round there, taking up minimum space. Or in fact, will that bend be tricky for thick cables, and would I be better off doing a bend round there? Oh, decisions, decisions. Honestly, will you look at the state of the van while I'm pulling everything out so as to try things? I've emptied the bedding compartment and I've just remembered that there is already a little bit of ducting down there. That's carrying the 12-volt circuit to the fridge, I think. Yes, I'm pretty sure it's to the fridge. And you can see that this metal, which is part of the original van construction, does actually dip away there. So if the bedding comes up to here, there is this space. And that goes round there. So could I make use of that somehow in feeding the cables from an inverter in there? By which I mean, with it in that corner, the mains could come out there and just flip over the top and work its way through a hole there, round the back there, and over to the main socket, and also the incoming mains from the shore line could come round the same way. The battery cables, despite having to come off that way, could come off that way. They're flat, but they could come at any sort of angle, so they could go off that way and sort of that way, and they could join, hang on, one that way and one that way, and they may be too thick to go behind there, but at the very least they might be able to run along the bottom there in a nice little arc round the bottom. And perhaps I end up putting a false bottom in here to keep the cables from being scuffed or anything by me throwing things in here. So perhaps a new false bottom is recommended here, just so that cables can, in fact they could come in a lovely big gentle arc round, couldn't they? If I had a false floor, they could gently come across there, and it wouldn't matter about the cables overheating with the bedding on top of them, because they'd have air around them because of the false floor. And then they'd come in here. I'm less keen on having the inverter this side and then running the cables through there under a false floor here, because they're just going around the corner, and it seems ridiculous to do an entire false floor in that whole section just to run the cables down that corner, although it would keep the cables shorter. So the bonus of it being here is a shorter run over to the battery, or to the main fuse. The bonus of it going over to that side is you get a nice gentle arc with no stress on the cables, and it's not that much longer. I do not know. Day 49. Idea 3007. How about it goes like that? Then the main sockets come out here. Ah, no, because they come upwards, so the supply out will be poking upwards, although it'll be against this, so it may not be a problem. Up and over that way to the main sockets. And that, now I know it looks like the negative is touching the earth's, touching the body of the van. It actually isn't touching, and even if it was, the 12-volt DC negative is grounded to the chassis anyway. But as it happens, that isn't touching, but then the wire could come off that way, that could come off that way. The distance to the battery then, which is here, or to the main fuse anyway, coming off the battery, is quite small. Put a false floor over it. Wouldn't be able to get all the bedding in there, but it would contain that down there, and I could easily screw that unit into the floor there, because the floor is nice and thick. So 4 screws down into the floor would hold that nicely in place, and it's actually quite nicely in place there already, just because of the virtue of these corners. I'm warming to that idea. That would leave that completely clear as storage. The main sockets there can just come up. I might put a bit of wood along here to separate the compartment, because then the socket power from that could come up and along here and be clipped to that wall, go through here, over here, over here, over here, and end up at the sockets. And with the battery there, the main isolation switch there, the fuse is here, all in this space. Ignore the water container. Let's take that out. So this becomes the battery space, which is going to be here, And this space at the front could then have the fuses, the mega fuses, and the main isolation switch, and then the wires would go off that way. So we'd lose this as useful storage space, but I might be able to rejig it so that things like the spanners and things could stay there. With a bit of division and partition, it could just become my tool store for the van. And then, yeah, inverter there. Right, I think I like that answer. So suggestions on the back of a postcard, please, or more realistically, in the comments if you think that's a terrible idea, and if so, why? Or if you think that's a good idea, and if so, why? While I'm here, I'm pleased to see that the new charger will easily slot into the space currently occupied by the old inverter, since the charger can no longer have its space here because the new switchboard comes out here. So switchboard here, charger goes down to there, taking its feed from the switchboard charger into the battery, which will be there. Keeps all the connections nice and short. Yes, I like that too. Incidentally, I've seen on several forums people saying that these cables which are supplied with the inverter are not thick enough to cope with the load from supplying 2000 watts, which you'd think odd. You'd think Renogy would supply cables that were up to the job, and I just wonder whether some of the people have simply put one of the sets on the battery. And the clear idea here, I think, is that you put both on at the same time, so 2 reds, 2 blacks, which together should have enough capacity, but doing them as 2 means you've got more flex in the cable. I don't know. I need to go and look up what the official millimetre squared size rating is for a 200 amp 12 volt cable. I know the American system is AWG, but I don't know what that is, because over here we do millimetres squared area of the cable. Anyway, I'll check that before I wire those up. Finally, everything is back in its place in the van. It looks neat and reasonably tidy, although it does need a vacuum. I can't imagine that was very much fun for you, so if you got this far, thank you for watching. However, for me, that was a tremendously useful exercise, as I now have a much better idea of how I'm going to put this thing together. So hopefully, in the next video, I need to order some bits, I need to order some wires, I want a new main, main on-off switch. That'll need to handle about 300 amps. And I need to do some measurements for those wires. Anyway, get some bits in, and then hopefully in the next video I will start putting it all together, which should be interesting. Trying not to blow myself up. Thanks for watching. Cheerio.